The fire is our life's blood when the wolf wind howls outside.
The frosty air of Scandinavia penetrated any clothing, freezing a person in a matter of minutes. How did these people manage to survive in wooden houses when an icy storm raged outside, capable of killing all living things? We are used to thinking of Vikings as fearless warriors, but their main enemy was not the armies of kings, but the merciless northern night. Every winter, they battled the cold using technologies and knowledge that modern science is only now beginning to understand. Their survival was not a matter of luck, but the result of a complex system of engineering solutions and everyday wisdom. There was no central heating, thermal insulation, or synthetic sleeping bags. There was only wood, stone, wool, and fire, which had to be managed with precision. One mistake, one extinguished coal, or a crack in the wall could cost the entire family their lives. It was a daily struggle to stay warm, where every item in the house had a hidden purpose. Watch the video to the end to find out exactly how the Vikings used the infrared radiation of stones and why sleeping alone could be a death sentence.
It is good to be inside tonight.
The fire is strong. The ale is good too.
What if I told you that everything you believed about the primitiveness of Viking dwellings is not true? The Viking longhouse was not just a wooden structure, but a real survival system. People spent almost the entire winter in it, so every detail had a purpose. The house had to retain heat, protect from the wind, and be durable. The Vikings did not build for a single season. They built for their clan and future generations. Even a simple farmer knew the basic principles of insulation, and they did this without blueprints, relying on experience and the logic of nature. The main enemy was the wind, which carries away heat faster than any frost. Therefore, the shape of the building was more important than decorations. Scandinavia dictated its rules, and these rules were harsh. People understood that corners could be a source of drafts, and smooth shapes could save energy. In those days, engineering was part of everyday life, and survival was a science, even if it wasn't called science. The house really resembled an inverted ship's hull, but this was not for beauty's sake. It worked as a shield against air currents. The curved walls helped the wind to flow around the building. Such a house shook less and cooled less. It seemed to hide behind its own streamlined shape. People noticed that the wind glided rather than hitting directly, and they took advantage of this for centuries. Builders of that time knew that the less resistance to the wind, the less cooling. Therefore, the walls were made smooth. This simple solution worked very effectively. It also reduced the load on the frame. This meant that the house lasted longer. Even snowstorms were easier to endure. People said that such a house gently meets the weather. The Vikings saw a building as a living organism that should breathe through the roof, but not through the walls. The walls had to be a strong boundary, and the roof had to be a controlled outlet for smoke and light. Air currents from above are not as dangerous as those from the side. Therefore, the shape of the roof was also important. The house had to accept snow as an ally, not an enemy, and it really worked. Shipbuilding logic, transferred to land, gave an advantage both on water and on land. The same people knew how to think about air and water flows. This dual engineering culture was preserved in their expeditions and homes, and it is surprisingly similar to the logic of modern aerodynamic solutions. Only then was it born out of necessity, not out of experimentation. The roof was indeed made of a thick layer of turf, which was heavy but effective. People laid earth and grass directly on top of wooden beams. This formed a dense and uniform layer. The weight was an advantage. It shook less in the wind. The roof structure became an energy shield, and the snow fell evenly on top, without sliding off. The grass and roots bound the layer of turf together so that it could not be easily destroyed. It worked like natural concrete. This is how the roof held its shape, and it did not let warm air escape. Even heavy rain was held back longer. The earth absorbed moisture, but it did not give up heat immediately, and that was important. In winter, snow enhanced the warming effect, turning the roof into an even thicker barrier. Snow filled in all the unevenness. It reduced the thermal conductivity of the roof. The Vikings even rejoiced at the snow on the roof, because after it fell, the hearth heated the house better and kept the temperature longer. It was the best insulation of that era. People said that the thicker the snow cover, the quieter the house, and the warmer the hearth. Snow outside became a thermal ally, not a destroyer. Unlike rain, snow did not extinguish heat abruptly. It accumulated it and created an additional layer of protection without penetrating the structure. The more snow there was, the more stable the temperature inside. This contradicts the modern fear of snow load, but back then it was a bonus. Because the structure was designed for the entire volume of insulation, the house became warmer and consumed less fuel, which is important. A thick layer of turf and snow prevented heat loss, like a scarf in severe cold. People felt it with their bodies rather than measuring it with instruments, but they made the right conclusions, and thanks to this, the houses were really warm. Not perfect, but life-saving, and that was their main success. Sometimes branches or reeds were added between the beams so that the turf would lie more tightly and not crumble. It was a hidden additional frame, a reinforcing layer of insulation. They built with their hearts and experience, not with a template. Each house was a unique test for warmth, and it passed. The walls were indeed made double, and the filling material was chosen based on availability in the region. Moss, clay, wool, and even dry grass were used. This showed that the Vikings knew how to combine materials to capture heat and keep it. The sandwich logic worked then just as it does now. In essence, they created an air cushion between the layers, which served as the main insulator. This is the most ancient principle of thermal insulation. Air is a poor conductor of heat. The house became a thermos. The Vikings did not know the word panel, but they knew its meaning, and they created it in real life. Every winter, people checked the walls with their hands and repaired weak spots where icy air could penetrate. This was done by the whole family or clan. Everyone in the family knew how to plug the gaps, because life depended on it. They didn't leave the work for tomorrow, because tomorrow could be deadly. They shared their experience verbally. What keeps heat better, what freezes faster, how moss behaves in the rain. The region was cold, but the houses were not cold mistakes. They were warm compromises, which saved lives and helped people live. Every crack was a weakness, so they caulked carefully, even if the wood was uneven. The Vikings planed the logs, but not to perfection, because perfection was not the main thing. The main thing was the absence of holes. They saved heat so as not to save lives. And that was the truth of the era. The deep floor system really helped the thermal inertia of the Earth to work as a heat accumulator. The Earth gives off heat slowly. It remembers summer longer than the air. The house was deliberately sunk into the ground a little. This stabilized the internal temperature in winter. Heavy doors were indeed part of the thermal design. They were made low, narrow, and dense to keep the warm layers of air on top. The entrance was covered with skin. It was a vestibule, and the slope at the entrance was practical, not symbolic. In winter, only one entrance to the house was used, while the other was closed with logs and skins to reduce drafts. This was a seasonal adaptation, like changing sails on a ship. The Vikings did not impress with comfort. but with the logic of protection. And the logic worked. They really didn't make windows because any opening would be a source of cold. Light was not more important than heat. Heat was a resource for life, and light was consciously sacrificed. Therefore, the smoke hole was the only window. It is interesting how this topic is perceived in different parts of the world, because the cold is different everywhere. The Vikings understood the cold differently, but the methods were universal. Where are you from? Write in the comments what methods of insulating homes are used in your region. Are you ready to learn the truth about what actually kept the Vikings warm when the fire went out? The central element of the house was not just a fire, but a long hearth that stretched along the middle of the dwelling. It was a complex structure made of stones laid in a special way on the earthen floor. The stones were not chosen at random. They had to have high heat capacity and not crack from the heat. During the day, an open fire was kept burning in the hearth, which was used to cook food and light the room. But the main secret was what happened to this hearth at night when everyone went to bed. Leaving an open flame unattended was deadly dangerous in a wooden house. Therefore, at night, the fire was covered. The coals were raked into a dense pile and covered with a layer of ash. The ash allowed just enough air to pass through so that the coals continued to smolder, but did not flare up into flames. The stones in the hearth, heated during the day, became powerful sources of infrared radiation. They gave off the accumulated heat slowly and evenly throughout the long night. It was a prototype of a giant stone battery that operated on inertia. It was this gentle, radiant heat that prevented the temperature in the house from falling to critical levels. The smoke from the hearth did not go straight into the chimney, which in fact did not exist in the modern sense. It rose under the high roof and accumulated there, forming a dense, warm cushion. This layer of smoke acted as additional insulation, preventing heat from escaping through the roof. The smoke vent was designed to release excess smoke, but retain heat. People lived in a layer of clean air below, while a black cloud of heat hung above their heads. The draft was controlled by opening or closing doors and adjusting the smoke vent with a long pole. This required skill, as a mistake could lead to either the house becoming cold or carbon monoxide poisoning. An experienced host could feel the movement of air with his skin and knew how to tune the house like a musical instrument. Fuel for the hearth was prepared in the summer, and its quality was critical. The Vikings used dense wood that produced a lot of heat and long-burning embers, such as oak or birch. In treeless areas, they used peat, which smoldered for hours, giving off even, steady heat. The fuel supply was stored inside the house so that the wood would dry out, and the fire's energy would not be wasted on evaporating moisture. The whole evening life was bustling around the hearth, and this was also part of the heating system. The heat from cooking, heated water boilers, all this added degrees to the overall heat reserve. In the evening, when the family gathered around the fire, the air warmed up as much as possible. The walls and objects absorbed this heat to give it back at night. Interestingly, the location of the hearth allowed clothes and shoes hung on beams above to dry. The moisture evaporated, increasing the humidity, which made the air feel warmer. Dry clothes in the morning were essential for survival the next day. This cycle of heating, drying, and cooling was repeated every night for centuries. During the most severe frosts, additional portable braziers with coals could be used. They were placed closer to the sleeping areas, creating localized zones of warmth. However, extreme caution was required due to the risk of carbon monoxide poisoning. Safety always balanced on the edge of the need to keep warm.
It's getting warmer in here. Just make sure you keep that window cracked like we discussed.
But even the hottest stones cooled down by morning, and then another form of protection came into play. In the next chapter, you will learn about a material that was more valuable than silver and saved lives where metal failed. I will reveal the most closely guarded secret of northern weavers, which allowed them to survive on the open sea and in icy homes. For the Vikings, wool was not just a fabric, but a strategic resource, the foundation of their civilization. But it was not the soft wool we buy in modern stores. The Vikings bred a special breed of sheep whose wool consisted of two types of fibers: stiff, long guard hairs and soft, warm undercoat. When spun, these two types of fibers were mixed together, creating a thread of incredible strength and thermal insulation. This thread was used to weave vadmal, a dense, heavy fabric that became the currency of the north. Vadmal was so valuable that it was used to pay taxes and fines and to buy land. The secret of its warmth lay not only in the material, but also in the way it was processed. The wool was not completely degreased, leaving it with its natural lanolin, an animal wax. Lanolin made the fabric virtually waterproof and windproof. Water rolled off such wool in drops without penetrating the fibers. Even if the fabric got wet, it continued to provide warmth, as wool protein releases a small amount of heat when wet. Weaving was exclusively a woman's craft, requiring tremendous patience and time. It took several women months of work to create a set of bedding and clothing for one warrior. Vertical looms stood in every home, and the sound of the shuttle was the sound of winter evenings. The density of the fabric was regulated by blows from a special sword-like tool that knocked the threads together into a monolith. Special heavy woolen blankets, often double or quilted, were made for sleeping. Such a blanket created a microclimate that lasted all night. The weight of the blanket was important. It fit snugly around the body, leaving no pockets for cold air. It felt like heavy, reliable protection. The Vikings also used felted wool, which was even denser than woven fabric. Felt was used to make bedding, shoe inserts, and sleeping caps. Felt provided excellent insulation from the cold surfaces of benches. It was an ancient analogue of modern foam, only breathable and warm. Woolen fabrics were often dyed with vegetable dyes, which, according to some researchers, could further compact the fiber structure. But for sleeping, undyed wool in natural shades was more commonly used. The rough texture of the fabric also provided a micro-massage to the skin, improving blood circulation. In conditions of immobile sleep, this was an important factor in keeping warm. Old, worn-out woolen items were never thrown away. They were unraveled into threads or used as stuffing for cracks and insulation for walls. Wool was an eternal material that served people until it completely disintegrated. Every scrap was valued and put to good use. The ability to choose the right wool for different tasks was a vital skill. Lamb's wool was used for underwear, and wool from adult sheep sheared in the fall was used for blankets. Knowledge of the properties of the material was passed down from mother to daughter. Without woolen textiles, the expansion of the Vikings would have been physically impossible. Vadmal blankets were so effective that they were used for centuries, even after the end of the Viking era. If you like learning about ancient technologies that work better than their modern counterparts, give this video a thumbs up. Guess what happened next when a person lay down on a wooden bench? Even in a warm longhouse, contact between the body and the hard wood quickly drew away the accumulated heat. People felt this immediately because wood, although warm to the touch, conducts cold faster than the ground if there is no layer between them. Therefore, the sleeping place was taken seriously, almost like a shield or armor. It was not a decoration, it was a necessity for survival. They relied on the experience of their ancestors and observations of nature. And each part of the bed was built in layers, as if it were a pie of warmth. Benches along the walls were the foundation of the house and its life in two senses, social and thermal. People sat on them during the day, discussing business, sharing food, and mending clothes. At night, they became beds for relatives and guests. The bench was wide so that it was safe and comfortable to sleep on. But in itself, it was only a frame, a cold platform. And then the work of insulating it from the bottom up began. The first bottom layer was made as airy as possible because air retains heat better than any dense material. Most often, spruce and pine branches, straw or dry reeds were used. It was a rough but important layer of insulation. It created a void between the body and the wood, and that void was the real secret to warmth. The turf that the Vikings laid on the roof was similar in principle to how mattresses were made inside. And this is no coincidence. People applied the same insulation ideas everywhere. What protected the house from the cold above also had to protect people from the cold surface below. The logic was the same, only on a different scale. The straw or reeds in the bedding layer had to be dry. The Vikings understood that wet material did not insulate well and became a source of mold and disease. It was regularly dried by the fire or replaced completely. Dryness was as important a requirement as warmth, and this was strictly monitored. Animal skins were laid on top of the air layer, which was the second main layer of insulation. They were chosen not for their beauty, but for their thermal properties and availability. The skin had to keep the air between the fur and the body of the sleeper. The more air, the warmer it was. But not all fur retained the same amount of heat. Reindeer lived in the harshest regions, and their fur evolved specifically to protect them from the cold. People noticed this long before the structure of the hairs was studied. It was light, elastic, and surprisingly springy with air. The Vikings understood that this skin retained heat, even if the house was a little drafty, and that made it the most valuable. Wool and sheepskin became a popular insulator for many families and clans. They were laid in overlapping layers to form a soft bed. The fur was always directed upwards, towards the body. This was practical because the pile created its own microclimate cushion. This meant that the body had less direct contact with the animal's skin. Bear skins were used by nobles, warriors, and wealthy people. They were heavy, dense, and lasted longer than sheepskin. But most importantly, they had thick pile that trapped air between the fibers. This skin was a status symbol, but first and foremost, it was a symbol of warmth. The hierarchy of materials was based on nature, not fashion. Sheepskins were the most affordable option for most people. They were laid in several layers to improve insulation. They were used with the fur facing up to create an air gap. Sheepskin curtains were also used to cover the sides for additional protection from the wind. Pillows were made from bags filled with down, soft wool, or bird feathers. Down was obtained from geese, birds that easily survived the cold thanks to the thermal properties of their feathers. It was a rare but very effective material. It warms the head and neck best when laid correctly, and that is why it was cherished. Bird feathers were a hidden treasure in the thermal culture of the northern peoples. The Vikings harvested them in the summer when hunting and gathering opportunities arose. They were stored in cloth bags to protect them from moisture and dirt. The pillow was used not only to cover the head, but also to cover the neck so that the heat would not escape upwards, because it is colder at the top. Sleeping areas were separated from the rest of the space by homespun woolen curtains. This created thermal pockets within a single space. It was warmer to breathe in such a pocket than to heat the house again. The curtain acted as a personal climate curtain. It protected against heat loss. In winter, only one entrance was used to avoid creating a wind corridor. The second entrance was closed with thick fabric or skins. This was a necessary seasonal habit, because air takes life away if it comes from two sides at once. And every northern family lived by this rule. The hearth remained the heart of the home and the source of thermal geography inside the building. The closer to the hearth, the more honorable and warmer the place. But warming up and sleeping are different tasks. Therefore, the bed was placed against the wall, but with a layer of earth, straw, and skins. And this was the architecture of survival within the architecture of the Scandinavian home. Even slaves and servants had bedding, because no one wants to die of frostbite, even in a hierarchical society. But their sleeping areas were closer to the entrance, where the temperature was lower. Sometimes it was warm at the entrance due to the density of people, but on the thermal map, these were the coldest places to live. Heated stones wrapped in thick cloth were used for the feet. This was an ancient form of a hot water bottle for the limbs. The stones were placed in the feet to warm the limbs before bedtime. This was an effective solution for warmth when there was a change in temperature, but the stones did not replace the skins. The skins were aired and shaken in the cold to destroy parasites and dry out moisture. Moisture was the enemy of warmth and health. A dry skin was a guarantee of healthy sleep. The Vikings believed that only fur and dry clothes helped to keep warm, but you had to warm yourself up. The bed was the stronghold of the family, and each layer was important. Straw, fur, and turf served as personal airtight capsules of warmth. But only a person exhausted by the cold can generate heat, and so they bowed to the house upon entering so that the house would not bow to the frost. And the more air there was between the layers of insulation, the less heat was taken away by the hard surface. Therefore, lying on thousands of thermoses was a real survival solution, but not every bed warmed equally. And all this worked like small winter engineering within the large engineering of a longhouse. And it changed not only the way of life, but also the way of thinking of the northern peoples. Are you ready to find out what living source of heat the Vikings used to survive the deepest night? Individualism in the Viking Age ended where the night cold began. Sleeping alone in winter was considered not just strange, but dangerously foolish. People slept in groups, huddled close together, using their body heat as a collective resource. It was a survival strategy rooted in instinct. Usually, an entire family or group of people would lie down on one wide bench. Children and women, who needed warmth and protection the most, would lie in the center. Men would lie on the edges, creating a living barrier against the cold air in the room with their bodies. Back to back, shoulder to shoulder. This is how a single thermal contour was created. Under a heavy wool blanket or animal skins, the temperature rose significantly higher than in the rest of the house. The heat emitted by several bodies accumulated in the enclosed space of the bed. This made it possible to survive even those nights when the fire in the hearth was almost extinguished. The breath of the sleepers also warmed the air under the canopy. This way of sleeping strengthened social bonds and a sense of family unity. In the darkness and cold, physical closeness provided a feeling of security and peace. This reduced stress levels, which is important for conserving energy. People felt like part of a single organism capable of withstanding the elements. Even guests staying overnight were included in this system. Refusing a guest a place on the common bench was a violation of the laws of hospitality. Guests were usually given a place in the middle, demonstrating respect and care. This was the highest manifestation of trust and protection. Interestingly, this practice extended beyond humans. During particularly harsh winters, Young animals, lambs or calves, could be brought into the house. Their warmth also contributed to the overall heating of the dwelling. At such moments, the boundary between the human world and the natural world was blurred. Collective sleeping required adherence to certain rules of hygiene and behavior. People washed in bathhouses when possible and kept their bodies clean. However, the smell of unwashed bodies and smoke was a natural backdrop to life that no one noticed. Warmth was more important than any conventions. Elderly people, whose thermoregulation was already weak, always got a place in the warmest corner or in the center of the group. Caring for the elderly was pragmatic. Their experience and knowledge were needed by the tribe. Losing an elder to the cold was an unacceptable waste. This tradition of sleeping together persisted in Scandinavian villages for many centuries. It only disappeared with the advent of efficient stoves and cheap fuel. But in the Viking era, the human body was the most reliable and accessible heater. A lone warrior on a campaign would also look for a companion to warm up under the same cloak. This was called brotherhood under the cloak and was considered a sacred bond. But what did the Vikings wear under these skins? If I showed you a time machine and transported you to a Viking's bedroom, you would be surprised at their choice of sleepwear. Contrary to popular belief, sleeping in heavy fur clothing was a bad idea. Outer clothing accumulated moisture from sweat and snow during the day, and sleeping in it meant freezing. Therefore, before going to bed, Vikings undressed, remaining in their underwear. Underwear was made of linen, a plant-based material that was comfortable against the skin and absorbed moisture well. A linen shirt created a layer of air between the skin and heavy wool blankets. This allowed the skin to breathe and prevented overheating and sweating. Sweating in winter is a precursor to hypothermia, so staying dry was a priority. Some preferred to sleep completely naked under piles of furs, if conditions allowed. This ensured better heat exchange between people sleeping together. Skin-to-skin contact is the most effective way to transfer heat. However, on the coldest nights, a linen shirt was an additional safeguard. A woolen cap or hat was often worn on the head. The head was the only part of the body that often remained outside the blanket, and a lot of heat escaped through it. Protecting the head during sleep was as important as a helmet in battle. Clean, dry woolen socks were worn on the feet. The feet are the first to get cold, and cold feet prevent sleep, depleting the body's strength. Therefore, every Viking had a pair of special sleeping socks, which they guarded like the apple of their eye. They were never worn outside to avoid getting wet. If clothes got wet during the day, they were hung over the hearth so that they would be warm and dry by morning. Putting on frozen, damp clothes in the morning was a painful ordeal that they tried to avoid. A warm shirt in the morning helped to retain the body heat accumulated during the night. Pants were usually taken off at night so as not to restrict blood circulation. Free blood circulation is the key to keeping the limbs warm. Any belts, ties, and straps were necessarily loosened. The body had to rest and recover. Women's nightgowns were long, reaching to the feet, and loose-fitting. They created their own cocoon of warm air around the body. Men's shirts were shorter, but also wide. Comfort and warmth were the main criteria of fashion at that time. Sometimes preheated clothing was used. It was kept by the fire before being quickly put on and diving under the blanket. This moment of transition from the warmth of the hearth to the warmth of the bed was the most critical. Speed and coordination were everything. Thus, the culture of sleep also included the culture of clothing. The ability to undress properly was as important as the ability to dress. In the next chapter, you will learn what fuel the Vikings used for their internal hearth. keep the stove warm, you need to throw wood into it, and to keep the body warm, you need to throw food into it. The Vikings intuitively understood the connection between nutrition and thermoregulation. Their winter diet was radically different from their summer diet. It was aimed at maximum calorie intake and prolonged digestion. Fat was their main ally in the fight against the cold. Dinner before bedtime was plentiful and hearty. The basis of the winter menu was boiled or roasted meat, often pork or lamb, with a large amount of fat. Fatty foods are digested slowly, providing the body with energy throughout the night. The digestive process itself generates heat, warming a person from the inside. Fish, especially fatty fish such as salmon or herring, was a constant guest on the table. Fish oil provided essential vitamins and energy. Fish was often dried or cured to obtain a concentrated protein product. Dried fish with butter was a typical winter snack. Dairy products occupied a special place: butter, cheese, and skyr, thick yogurt. Butter was added wherever possible, literally pouring it over porridge or fish. It was believed that the more butter you ate, the less you would feel the cold. Hot soups made from grain and meat simmered for a long time in cauldrons over the hearth. Eating a bowl of hot, thick soup before bed meant starting up your internal reactor. Grains provided long-lasting carbohydrates, and meat provided building material and warmth. The Vikings drank warm beer or mead. Alcohol in small doses dilated the blood vessels, creating a feeling of warmth, but it had to be consumed with caution. More importantly, the drinks were often hot, warming the throat and stomach. Food supplies for the winter were carefully prepared. Meat was smoked, salted, and fermented. Fermented foods such as shark, hakal, had a specific taste but high energy value. Fermentation allowed vitamins necessary for immunity to be preserved. The lack of fresh vegetables was compensated for by stocks of onions, garlic, and cabbage. These products helped fight disease. A healthy body resists the cold better than a sick one. Children and the elderly were fed first, given the fattiest and most nutritious pieces. It was an investment in the survival of the clan. A hungry person freezes much faster than a full one, so saving food in winter could be fatal. Thus, food was not just a means of satisfying hunger, but biological fuel. The winter feast was an act of survival, a strategic energy boost before a long, cold night.
The endless night weighed heavily in the
But cold is not only a physical challenge, but also a psychological one. People in the Viking era knew that darkness was as oppressive as frost, especially when the days became short and the nights endless. The polar seasons in the northern lands tested the mind for strength, just as a sword tests a shield. They understood that fear arises in the mind faster than in the body. Therefore, they defended the mind first, and then the walls. Surviving the winter meant learning to live with oneself and one's clan in constant darkness. The endless polar night, when the sun barely rose above the horizon, could drive even the strongest warrior mad. In northern regions, the sun could be absent for weeks in winter, and the day turned into a grey strip between twilight. People lost their sense of time, and that was what disoriented them the most. The darkness intensified their longing, fatigue, and irritation. The Vikings did not consider these feelings to be a weakness, but rather a threat to the survival of their clan. And the main rule was simple: if you don't defeat the darkness within yourself, the darkness will defeat you. The Vikings developed powerful mental defense mechanisms that allowed them to stay sane in darkness and isolation. Their strategies were everyday, oral, ritualistic, but proven over the years. They created an atmosphere in the home that helped the mind to breathe even when night fell. every member of the clan understood that it was not only the logs, turf, and hearth that were important, but also the mood of the people inside. The house was a refuge for the body, but the real refuge for the mind was habits and culture. And these habits had to be repeated daily so as not to lose balance. The atmosphere in the house was as important as the air temperature. If the house became morally cold, even a warm hearth could not save it from internal collapse. Smoke, light, and voices had to remind everyone that the house was alive. A lively atmosphere meant that the family was holding together and order was being maintained. People believed not in ideal comfort, but in the right balance of life within the walls. And that saved them. Evenings were spent telling sagas and stories. This was not a luxury leisure activity, but a structured way to keep the mind active when the outside world was frozen. The sagas told of battles, seas, gods, and ancestors, but most importantly, they told of what had already been experienced and overcome. People listened because hearing a voice meant not being alone. During the long winter, the storyteller became a symbol of the continuation of life. History lived in words, and words warmed more than fur. It was not just entertainment. It was a way to pass on experience, strengthen the spirit, and distract from the howling wind outside the walls. The storm outside could sound frightening, but the storm inside the saga sounded like a familiar enemy that could be encountered and defeated. And that changed the perception of fear. The storyteller's voice created a new reality, taking listeners away from the grim reality. Even children knew the names of the heroes and the sequence of their exploits. This gave the brain images instead of darkness. People didn't just listen, they lived the stories together with the tribe. And this unity drove out anxiety. Heroic myths reminded them that their ancestors had survived even worse times. The Vikings knew that if their ancestors could do it, so could they. This fueled their confidence. And this fuel lit a fire in their minds, not just in their homes.
His forebears endured even worse hardships, giving him the confidence to face the present.
The concepts of Inangard and Utangard structured their world into internal and external order. This is how they explained to their children the boundary between safe and dangerous. It was simple logic that everyone understood, and this logic was reassuring. Inside the house, there was order, warmth, law, and safety, which people created with their own hands and words. Maintaining order was considered a duty. Duty was higher than fear. Fear was lower than the hearth. Outside, chaos reigned, and people believed that the home should be a barrier not only from the wind, but also from evil thoughts. Even if storms raged outside the walls, inside there had to be a microcosm of law. This helped to keep one's sanity, because honor and order do not freeze if they are warmed with words. Maintaining this order inside the house was a sacred task for everyone. The ritual was not magic, but the repetition of discipline. Repetition is stronger than darkness. Darkness is weaker than routine. Manual labor was the second method of mental defense. When your hands are busy, your mind rests. People believed that anxiety recedes when the brain is focused on a task, and the task can be simple, but regular. In winter, men engaged in wood carving, weapon repair, and the manufacture of small parts for ships and tools. This was not only useful but also meditative, although they did not know the word meditation. They said, if you don't repair it, it will break. And this applied to both the axe and the mind. Repair was an island of control. Control is the foundation of reason. Women spun, wove, and sewed so that their movements were in rhythm with the fire and their voices rather than with panic or boredom. The work was monotonous because it allowed the mind to distract itself and calm down without trying to digest all the horror of winter at once. They competed not with their neighbors, but with idleness, which breeds darkness. And to defeat idleness is to defeat melancholy. Holidays like Yule broke up the dark season into points of reference. Yule was celebrated during the winter solstice as the most important winter transition of the year. It was a point of reference and hope. Hope was the calendar. The calendar warmed the mind. Feasts, sacrifices, songs, and games spoke the same message in hearts and minds. The sun will return because it has returned before. It was a form of collective memory and a prediction for the future. Games of dice and Nefertaf made the mind work and argue with luck, not darkness. Luck is better known than darkness. Darkness is less known than luck. Personal space was almost non-existent physically, but it was respected tacitly. People knew how to turn away from each other morally when necessary so as not to get annoyed. This created internal boundaries without walls. These boundaries taught patience. Patience is the brother of survival. Fatalism in the face of destiny gave rise to fearlessness. They believed that life and death were predetermined by the Norns. They accepted fate calmly. Calmness conquered darkness, and darkness did not argue with what was accepted. The most insidious enemy of warmth was drafts. An imperceptible stream of icy air could cool a house overnight and lead to illness. Therefore, the Vikings created a complex system of airflow control, which can be called a smoke lock. The front door never opened directly into the living area. There was always a vestibule or porch that created a buffer zone. Double doors or heavy curtains made of animal skins that had to be pulled aside were often used. This minimized the sudden loss of heat when entering and leaving. The thresholds in houses were made high. This was not only a structural feature of the log house, but also protection from the cold air below. By stepping over the high threshold, a person left the coldest layer of air outside. The main engineering challenge was the smoke vent. It had to be kept open just enough to let the smoke out, but not let the heat escape. For this purpose, special covers on long poles were used, which could be controlled from the floor or rotating boards that worked like a weather vane. Cracks in the walls were found using a candle flame or a wet hand. Any draft was immediately blocked with moss, wool, or clay. The walls were hung with woven carpets or skins, which created an additional layer of insulation and dampened air movement. Sleeping areas often had high sides to protect the sleeper from drafts across the floor. In fact, people slept in wooden boxes without lids. This created a zone of stagnant air around the body. Ventilation was necessary to prevent people from suffocating from fumes and smoke. Balancing fresh air and warmth was a delicate art. Experienced builders positioned openings to create natural drafts without cooling the lower living quarters. In winter, the outside walls of the house were additionally covered with snow or earth up to the roof. This created a powerful external protection from the wind. The house turned into an artificial hill, inside which life glowed. Wind protection began at the stage of choosing a location for construction. Houses were built in lowlands, behind hills or forests, with their ends facing the prevailing winds. The landscape was the first line of defense. Fighting drafts was a daily routine. It was an invisible war where victory meant just another warm morning. Centuries of living in the north changed the very biology of these people. The Vikings did not just use technology, they themselves were the result of the most brutal natural selection. Those who could not tolerate the cold simply did not leave any offspring. The genetics of northerners adapted to the harsh conditions. Studies show that northerners have more active brown fat. This special tissue in the body can quickly burn calories to generate heat, acting as an internal heater. The Vikings probably had this mechanism developed to its fullest extent. The blood circulation of Northerners also had its own characteristics. Their blood vessels in the limbs were able to periodically expand in the cold, allowing portions of warm blood to flow to the fingers to prevent frostbite. This phenomenon is known as the hunter's reaction. From childhood, Vikings underwent harsh training. Children were not overdressed, allowing their bodies to learn thermoregulation. Bathing in cold water, walking barefoot, and living in cool rooms trained their immune systems. The body got used to not shivering from the cold, but activating its resources. Their tall stature and strong physique also helped them stay warm. A massive body with developed muscles cools down more slowly. Physical strength was necessary not only for combat, but also for generating heat through work. Their metabolism was tuned to process large amounts of protein and fat. The ability to efficiently digest heavy food and convert it into energy was an evolutionary advantage. Their stomachs were lined with zinc, and their livers worked like furnaces. Psychological adaptation was part of their physiology. They did not perceive cold as suffering. For them, it was a normal environmental condition. The absence of fear of cold reduced physiological stress. For generations, they learned to read the signs of nature, predicting the weather by the behavior of animals, the color of the sunset, and the wind. This allowed them to prepare in advance for storms and frosts. Knowledge was part of their biological survival. They were children of winter, made for this world. Their bodies, their homes, and their habits were a unified system, honed over centuries. The Vikings did not survive in spite of nature. They were part of it. We have seen that the Vikings' ability to sleep through freezing nights and wake up full of energy was not magic or mere endurance. It was a complex combination of architecture, textile technology, social organization, and physiological adaptation. They turned their daily lives into a perfect energy-saving mechanism, where every detail, from the shape of the roof to the composition of their dinner, worked toward a single goal: the preservation of life. Their experience reminds us that comfort is not just a degree on a thermometer, but also the ability to interact with the environment. They did not try to defeat winter with brute force. They learned to use its resources and defend themselves from its blows with wisdom worthy of respect. Which Viking technology do you think was the most ingenious? Breathable wool, a living heat accumulator made of sleeping people, or the architecture of the Longhouse? Write your opinion in the comments and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new dives into the history of survival.